Welcome, all my fellow Redskin brethren. It's news that's nightly about the Redskins. Welcome to the Redskins Nightly News live. I, of course, am your set man, Louis T. Thank you for joining me. And don't forget all you Redskins sistren out there as well. Let's get to tonight's lead story. So, I wanted to start this show off a little differently. For the first time last night, I sat down and I started to take a gander at the 2020 NFL draft. Now, I did not do a deep dive. So generally, when you do a deep dive, you start to uncover gems. You find out players are better than you perceive them to be initially in the process. And you start to feel differently about players that you may have dismissed early on in the process. At least that's what happens for me. Generally, I see these players throughout the college football season. Maybe I don't think as much about them. Maybe I watched them in a game where they performed poorly or not their best. And so I formulate an opinion off of not enough tape. So these initial preliminary findings, you should not run off with them and use them as the end-all be-all. These things are very fluid, especially when you're talking NFL draft and prospects. It's a very fluid situation. 1 week you could feel one way about a guy, watch some tape, start to feel a little differently, watch more tape, and then you're sold on that particular player. And initially, you didn't think that player was going to be worthy of a, let's say, second round pick. Now you feel like, hey, this guy could sneak into the late round, first round. You know, that's how talented this guy could potentially be for a team if he gets into the right fit. So I'm not here to tell you that everything I'm saying tonight is etched in stone, but I did do a preliminary look at the 2020 NFL draft and the prospects and the guys that I think are going to be people that teams take a look at, players that teams look at and see if they can help them in the earlier rounds of this draft. And I'm going to give you a quick little overview of what I think. So this is a draft that I don't think it's as deep at quarterback as everyone thinks. I think it's a solid draft at quarterback. It's not last year's draft at quarterback or even the year previous to that, you know. And I know last year there weren't many guys that went in the first round. Okay, there were only three. And you could argue that maybe our guy wasn't supposed to go in the first round. I beg to differ. Now that I've seen him, but initially last year, I wasn't sold on Dwayne Haskins as a first round pick, but I was on Drew Lock. So I thought there were going to be three quarterbacks taken in the first round either way, because I assumed Haskins would be taken, and I thought Lock would too. I had no idea Lock was going to fall out of the first round and Daniel Jones would then take his place. But either way, I think this group in 2020 is probably more on par with last year's group than the year previous, where I thought there were many more talented passers in that particular draft. We'll see which draft turns out to be better, but I'm not as sold. And then with Tua saying that there's a high probability that he goes back to Bama after this injury, I'm not so sure this is going to be all of that at the quarterback position. But we don't need a quarterback anyway, okay? Running back, I think it's a quality draft class in terms of running backs. Not blown away by this group of running backs. Don't know if there's a true first round pick in the group. I know a lot of people love Jonathan Taylor out of Wisconsin. I don't know if he's got the home run hitting ability that I want out of a first round back, but I mean, he could be Josh Jacobs. You know, he could. I don't think he has that kind of ability, but why can't he be a mid-20s pick? I don't think we have a top 10 back in this draft. Let me say that. You get to wide receiver. We desperately need a wide receiver, and there are plenty in this draft. You'll be able to get you a quality wide receiver into the second round, okay? I think they're going to go quickly in this draft. I think when you have this many guys that can impact the game, I think you're going to see 4, maybe even 5 of these guys go in the first round. I could be overrating them, but we've seen what a great combine and some really good interviews can do for some of these guys. The tape is there. You know, when you're talking talent with the receivers, you know, that's my favorite position group to take a look at. And I see so much talent in this draft class. It's not even funny. The receivers may be the deepest group of players in this particular draft of all the positions. It's that good. And it's not just top heavy. I think there's some talent throughout. You may be able to even uncover a few gems, throughout the second into the third, maybe even into the fourth round. So I think it's a really good crop of wide receivers. And I look forward to the Redskins getting their hands on at least one of these players in the earlier rounds. Another position that we really need help at desperately is tight end. And unlike last year where I was drooling, salivating over the tight end position, that's not the case this year. I think this is a really porous tight end group. And right now I'm looking at the group and I'm like, it's Albert O out of Mizzou, and then it's a bunch of other guys. Now, I think when I go back and watch the tape, I may look at a few of these guys and be like, he's pretty solid. Like, I know Cole Kmet out of Notre Dame. I'm a Notre Dame Fighting Irish. He's a solid tight end. He's not, to me, a move-the-needle guy per se, but he's not garbage, all right? He can help, but I was looking for a true difference maker. Last year, there were true difference makers all through the first 2, possibly 3 rounds at the tight end position. Jay Sternberger hasn't even really seen the field for the Green Bay Packers. I still think he's going to be a stud in this league. You've seen what Dawson Knox has done for the Bills this year. He's been outstanding. You've seen flashes from Noah Fant in Denver. I don't think TJ Hawkinson has lived up to his first round billing quite yet, but give him time. He's a talented pass catcher as well. I could go on and on and on about the tight end group from last year. I told anyone that would listen that Foster Moreau was going to be a stud at this level, and I wanted the Redskins to take him. They had ample opportunities. The Raiders take him. He's one of the leaders with rookies in terms of tight ends and touchdowns this season. He's been outstanding for the Raiders. That group was so deep last year. I was so impressed. I wanted the Redskins to take a guy. They didn't. I think they're going to regret it because this crop of tight ends, not very impressive. I don't think there's a first-round tight end in the group. You remember Hunter Henry, the year that he was the first tight end taken off the board, and he went in the second round, early stages of the second to the Chargers? I think that's what you're going to see with Albert O in this draft. I don't think there will be a single first-round tight end in this entire draft, and then you'll see a guy like Albert O go off the board early stages of the second round. That's my initial glance at the tight end position. I could go back and assess these players and find out that I was wrong. But just initially taking a look, not overly impressed with this crop of tight ends. And it's unfortunate for us because we really desperately need help at tight end. And maybe it'll come in the form of free agency. Maybe it'll have to, because if I'm the Redskins, there isn't a guy in this draft that I'm going to spend a first round pick. We currently don't have a second round pick, but then again, if they trade Trent, we'll probably yield a second round pick there. But so much time for that to develop and us to have a clearer picture of what the Redskins will have in terms of ammunition when we get to the 2020 draft. So right now, I don't really love what I see at tight end, and we desperately need help there. So that's a little disappointing. You get to the tackles. This was a position that I thought you either had to grab one quick because there weren't going to be many worth having in this draft. I think I'm wrong. I think there could be easily 3, maybe even 4, upwards of 5 first-round tackles in this draft. I think you're probably going to see, and tackles go quick. We know in this league there aren't enough quality left tackles, and so when teams have a need and they see talent, they usually go and swipe it quickly. We see it every single year with tackles. They get pushed up the board because teams want to get theirs and get it quickly. We saw the Texans overreach for a couple of tackles, I thought, last year. And one got kicked inside the guard and Max Scarpering, and the other, Titus Howard, actually hasn't been that bad at right tackle. But when you select a guy as high as they did, I'm thinking more along the lines of left tackle, but that's nor here nor there. Bottom line is it's a little bit more talent at the tackle position than I initially thought. And thus, I don't know if the Redskins have to take a tackle with their first round pick. If they don't get a top 3 pick, that's probably where I would go if I'm the Redskins, and just go ahead and knock that out. I would love to explore corner or, one of these other positions where there are going to be so many talented players and you want elite stuff at the top of the draft. If you're going to have a top 5 pick, you need to get something elite. Why not get the best tackle in the draft if you can't get your hands on Chase Young or someone like that? So I think there's a little bit more depth at tackle than I initially thought. But again, that remains to be seen. You look at guard. It's solid. Not going to knock anyone's socks off. There may be 2 first-round guards, and then after that, I think you may start to see that position thin out a bit. Same thing with center, not anyone. Last year, there were centers going off the board, and I think we saw, if I'm not mistaken, 3 centers go in the first 50 picks. So centers were a hot commodity last year. The Saints grabbed a center. The Packers grabbed a center in the second round. And in the first round, the Vikings grabbed Bradbury out of NC State. So last year's centers were hot. And they came off the board, and there were some talented centers. Elton Jenkins went to the Packers in the second round. You had Eric McCoy go to the Saints in the second round. And then, like I said, you had the Vikings take Bradbury. So there were some talented centers last year. I don't know if I see that crop being as talented this year. But nonetheless, I think that's another group where you probably, if you're in the market for one, we're not necessarily, but you could get one a little bit later on in the draft. Not necessarily looking to pick one early on because the talent doesn't suggest that you make that selection. You get to the other side of the football and you start talking about the defensive line. I'm not overly impressed. I'm not blown away by the defensive line in this particular draft. There are a couple of guys that stand out at the top, but it really starts to thin out. And I think all the guys start to look the same after you get past the first 3 or 4 guys at defensive line. But again, I will go back. I will really comb over these players and I'll be able to assess what their strengths and weaknesses are. I can tell you this much. I'm not blown away by the pass rushers in this draft. Last year, we felt like, man, there are so many guys that can bag quarterbacks. You feel good about getting a Brian Burns or a Josh Allen or a Nick Bosa. I wasn't high on Cleveland Farrell, but the Raiders obviously were. You see what the Raiders ended up getting in the 4th round with Max Crosby. There were so many guys that could get after the quarterback. We got Montez Sweat. We'll see what he develops into. But there were so many of those guys last year. You were like, wow, this is an intriguing group of guys that can get to the quarterback. I don't really feel that way about this year's crop. I think there are 1 or 2 guys that you really feel confident that at the next level, their talent is going to shine through. And then the rest of these guys, they're question marks. I don't feel as confident. So what I'm telling you is if the Redskins don't get their hands on a guy like Chase Young, there may not be more opportunities to get guys that are true difference makers in this draft. Now, every year, it seems like you get a guy that goes in the 3rd or the 4th round that no one's really talking about that ends up being a really good pass rusher. Maybe the Redskins could get their hands on one of those guys. Don't forget the Redskins drafted Jordan Brailford last year, and I really liked him out of Oak State. Maybe he comes off of injury and performs well for us next year. If Nate Orchard is who we think he is, I don't know about Chris Odom. We'll get more looks at these guys. Ryan Kerrigan is back. We'll talk about that a little bit later, though. But if we get more looks at these guys and we're content with what we see, maybe you don't have to go out and make a splash move. And I mean, again, if you're drafted 2nd overall, it's a no-brainer. You take Chase Young. Forget about all the guys that are on the roster. You just add him to the mix. But if you're not there, but you love him and you want him, I don't think you make a move to do anything rash to get him. I think you just stand pat with what you have and you add to a different position that you need help at, like left tackle or possibly corner, depending on where you're selecting in this draft. So we'll see what happens. But I'm not overly blown away by the pass rushers in this particular draft. You look at linebackers. To me, it's another one of these drafts, man, where there's not a lot there. Last year, there were the 2 Devins, and then it was like a steep drop-off. There were some guys that I actually liked, but I didn't love anybody else at the linebacker position. And I was more of a Devin Bush guy than I was a Devin White guy, but I think both of them are going to be really good. I'm just telling you right now, it's just not a lot there, inside. And that's another one of those positions. Damn, it'd be nice to go ahead and find a guy that could change the game. And you know how I said I was drooling over Fred Warner. I don't know if you guys heard me talking about Fred Warner, but why can't we get a Fred Warner in the 3rd round out of BYU? Why can't we find one of those guys? He's so good. He's so good. He's one of the best. Nobody's talking about him. He's one of the best inside linebackers in the league right now. Sideline to sideline speed. One of those guys that's a pure tackling machine. Awesome, and not just good, awesome in coverage. And he's an innate blitzer. He has an innate ability to get to the quarterback. So he's a total package. 3rd round. Why can't we find that guy? And don't talk to me about Cole Holcomb. I like Cole Holcomb. He's no Fred Warner. Why can't we find one of those guys? We need one of those guys because I think Cole Holcomb is a liability in coverage. He may be able to get to the quarterback if he blitzes, or he may be able to, run with a running back out into the flats. He may be able to sniff a run out and get into the backfield, use his speed to get a tackle for loss. But I don't think he is good in coverage. So I want a 3-down linebacker. I don't want a 2-down linebacker. So anyway, I'm not blown away by the linebacker position. It looks really thin again. So we'll see what happens there. As you get into the secondary, cornerback is intriguing. I think there are some guys that can play in the secondary at the cornerback position. I think there may be a little bit of depth there. Safety, not so much. I think it's top heavy. And then after that, I think it starts to thin out. So again, when you start looking at these positions that the Redskins need, I think the Redskins are looking at safety potentially. I know the Redskins want to add corners to the mix. That's a position that I like in this particular draft. I think there are some talented football players there. If the Redskins need a corner, looking at Okudah from Ohio State, and that's a guy that could potentially be there when the Redskins select, depending on where they pick. So, they're going to be options for the Redskins, obviously, depending on where they land in this draft. But we'll see what happens. But linebacker, not that big of a linebacker draft for me, not that big of a tight end draft. Those are two big positions for the Redskins. It'll be interesting to see when I deep dive into the tape on some of these players, if there is a third or a fourth or a fifth round guy that I think the Redskins could snag and actually get production out. Again, no one was really talking about Terry McLaurin last year as a third round pick. I damn sure it wasn't. And look what he turned out to be for the Redskins. So it doesn't have to be a first or a second round guy. I think where you really build your roster, and I know you guys have heard this before, is in the mid rounds of the draft, okay? The meat and potatoes of your roster is built third, fourth, and fifth round. That's where you're going to get your special teamers. That's where you're going to get your guys because everyone on the team isn't going to be a star. You want stars, and those guys are great, but it's the key cogs. It's the guys that make the machine work that are going to drive your football team. It's the guys that just show up every day, lunch, pail, all right, hard hat, and do their job. They're nothing more, nothing less. They're just going to do their job, and they're going to do it to the best of their abilities, and it's not going to hurt you. You need guys on your team like that, and you generally find those guys in the third through the fifth round. So that's my little quick synopsis of the draft. I just wanted to bring that to your attention because I actually took a look at the draft for the first time yesterday, and that's my initial diagnosis. Again, I'll deep dive, and we'll be able to talk very, very in-depth about the draft and particular players and how they fit and where the Redskins should go. We'll have plenty of time to do that in the offseason, but I just wanted to give you that quick breakdown. So I want to go to my other co-lead for the night, and that is the social media maneuvers that we had yesterday. I gave you a couple of scenarios that I wanted you guys to respond to. The first of which was, hey, how do you feel about Ron Rivera? He was fired yesterday by the Carolina Panthers. All right. Would you like to see Ron Rivera here in Washington as the next head coach? And it was kind of mixed. I was surprised. I thought there would be more no's. And there were, it started out no. Then it was like, yeah, I'm cool with that. Yeah. And then it was like, no, yeah. So it was pretty mixed. I am personally good. I like Ron Rivera. I think he's a really good coach. I don't think he's what we need here, though, okay? So I like Ron Rivera. Ron Rivera is going to get another job. I just don't think it should be here in Washington because I don't think his personality necessarily fits what we need in our next head coach. Now, he's a great guy from all reports. Seems like a great person. So he's going to relate very well to his players. I felt like a lot of players were heartfelt in their condolences for him being fired, and they had nothing but praises and things nice to say about him yesterday. So that tells me that he connects with his players. That's a great thing, but Jay Gruden was also a coach's player. Chris Thompson was crying when he got fired. Trent Williams said he felt bad not being here to help Jay potentially keep his job. Like, Jay Gruden was a player's coach. Those guys don't always work, though. And I'm not saying you want an asshole to be a coach. Here, there needs to be a fine line you walk in, a balance. And I think the next guy that comes in here has to have an authoritative voice, And I'm not saying Ron Rivera doesn't have that, but when you listen to a lot of the charges, and I said this yesterday, filed against Ron Rivera, a lot of them sound like the same issues we had with Jay Gruden, which I'm looking for a breath of fresh air with the next guy. I want someone that kind of fixes a lot of the ills that we had with the last regime. And so if you hire a guy that has the same kind of temperament and you're looking for different results, it kind of sounds like insanity. So I'm good on Ron Rivera, although I like Ron Rivera as a coach, and I think he's going to land on his feet elsewhere in this league. It could be possibly in this division. When you look at the Giants, I think they're going to fire Pat Shurmur. The ex-Panthers GM, Dave Gettleman, is in New York. I'm just connecting dots. All right, so I'm not saying, I'm just saying. And then the other thing that I asked you guys to respond to was Redskins offensive untouchables. So I asked, who are the guys that you would keep on this roster if you had an opportunity to say, hey, look, these guys are going to be here no matter what. The rest of these guys, they're all for sale. If other teams want to come in, poach them away, they can have at it. But these are the guys they can't touch on the offensive side of the football. I actually sat down and made a list because last time I tried to wing it and I forgot my man on the defensive side, that is. I forgot my man, your man, our man, all right? I just forgot his name. That's how I forgot him on the sheet last time, and I forgot his name. It'll come to me. Don't worry about it. But anyway, if I could just, I'm trying to see his number. If I could just see his number, then his name will pop into my head. I'm having a brain fart. It'll come to me. Anyway, Matt Ioannidis. All right? Matt Ioannidis. So I made a list this time so I wouldn't forget anybody. And so this is what my list sounds like. Dwayne Haskins at quarterback. At the running back position, Darius Geis and Bryce Love. At the wide receiver position, Terry McLaurin, Calvin Harmon, Steven Sims Jr. At offensive line, Eric Flowers, Wes Martin. Now, hear me out on Wes Martin. I don't know what he is yet. All right. I don't know if Wes Martin can play at a very high level or not. So I'm not willing to give up on him, and I don't want anybody snatching him away, coaching him up, and all of a sudden he turns out to be a Pro Bowler down the road for someone else. Wes Martin could be average, and I think he is. You know, when I watched him on tape, I told you I was not blown away. However, I didn't think Eric Flowers was going to amount to much at guard, and look what he turned out to be. So I'm not willing to give up on Wes Martin. So he's on my list. Chase Rouillet, Brandon Sheriff, and Morgan Moses. I know a lot of you aren't Morgan Moses fans. That's fine, but you could do a lot worse at right tackle. I'm just, look, if there isn't a hole, I'm not trying to create one, okay? I know I always tell the kids and the youth out there, don't quit your job until you already have another one, all right? And the next one that you have needs to be better than the first one, right? With Morgan Moses, don't get rid of Morgan Moses and say, well, let's just draft another right tackle. Let's just go get another right tackle. Because I'm not sure that the guys on the roster, all right, most notably the guy that filled in for him on Sunday is all that good, all right? I'm not quite sure about Jerron Christian, all right? I never, ever trust a man with two first names. I'm not sure about Jerron Christian. I'm just not. So I'm comfortable with Morgan Moses. Yep, you're going to get some false starts. Yep, you're going to get some holds. Yep, Morgan Moses isn't the greatest right tackle in the world, but he's not the worst, all right? You could do better, but you could do a hell of a lot worse. I'm comfortable. I'm fine with Morgan Moses, okay? So that's my list. To recap once more, Dwayne Haskins, Darius Geis, Bryce Love, Terry McLaurin, Kelvin Harmon, Steven Sims Jr., Eric Flowers, Wes Martin, Chase Rouillet, Brandon Sheriff, Morgan Moses. A notable that I left off the list, some of you listed, was Adrian Peterson. You know what? I don't have a problem if you put him on your list, but Adrian is really not a part of the future. So if someone wanted to poach him, I wouldn't have a problem with that. I love what he's doing for us. And he's contractually going to be on this roster next year unless the Redskins decide to go in a different direction. I would not have a problem with him being on the roster again next year. All right. But I'm listing guys that I want to be a part of the future moving forward. And Adrian Peterson, not going to be part of that future. But I love what AD is doing for this team and what he did last year, what he's doing this year, and what he could potentially do for the Redskins next season as well. But I didn't think it was enough to put him on the list. So there is that. And also, no Paul Richardson on my list, no Trey Quinn on my list. Now, I know some of you want Trey Quinn the hell out of here. I don't feel that way. You know how I feel. I don't feel that way about Trey Quinn. I think Trey Quinn is just fine. I think if given more opportunities, remember week 1 versus Philadelphia, how good Trey Quinn was? Remember last year on Thanksgiving versus Dallas, how good Trey Quinn can play. Let's not act like he can't play. Trey Quinn is not Steven Sims Jr. No, he's not. And I think Steven Sims Jr. may be a better option in the slot. And I think we started to see glimpses of that last week. But that doesn't mean Trey Quinn doesn't have a role on this team. So, but he's not on my list either. So, in any event, let's move on to in other news. So, obviously it's Wednesday, which means interim head coach Bill Callahan and starting quarterback Dwayne Haskins both stepped up to the podium. And not much from Bill Callahan today. I think the biggest thing we got from him was the injury update. So at practice today, Kerrigan is out of concussion protocol, which means he's going to play on Sunday. Barring any setbacks, he should be on the field. And I don't know how I feel about that. I really wanted to see more of Orchard, more of Odom, and more of Sweat on the left side. So I don't know if the defensive coordinator, Greg Minuski, understands that, hey, Sweat looked pretty damn good on that side. Let's give him some more reps over there. Speaking of Montez Sweat, he was also at practice today. So was Morgan Moses. So looks like a lot of the guys that didn't finish the game or didn't play in the game, as in the case with Kerrigan, looked like they could be a go on Sunday. We'll see. You know how Wednesday practice is, okay? I never make too much of Wednesday's practice because that's the first day. You know, guys can miss it. Guys could perform there and then still not play. We've seen it before this season, i.e. Jordan Reed. We've seen guys not practice on Wednesday, even be in a walking boot, i.e. Case Keenum, and still play. So we'll see what happens. But it's a good thing that all of those guys in Kerrigan, Sweat, and Moses all were on the practice field on Wednesday. Guys who were absent from practice, no Paul Richardson, no Trey Quinn. And at this point, if I'm the Redskins with Paul Richardson, just put the man on IR already. What are we doing here? Go ahead. Let's continue to see Kelvin Harmon. Let's continue to see Steven Sims. Cam Sims got a little bit of run last week, even though he came in and got a goddamn penalty, not lining up correctly. But let's see the young fellas. We know what Paul Richardson is at this point. And I don't have a problem with him being on the roster next year either, okay? Depending on what that cap number looks like and what the Redskins do in the draft, that will probably dictate what the Redskins decide to do with a guy like Paul Richardson, but I don't have a problem with him being on the roster. I know some of you are tired of him being injured as well. I get that. Hasn't been worth the money that we've paid him thus far, but I still think that if in the right system, if given opportunities, I think this guy's uber talented. And in Seattle, they only got one really good year out of him. I'm still waiting for my one good year. Maybe we paid, $40 million for one good year. Well, I'm still waiting for my one good year. Maybe that's next year. Maybe it's the year after that. We'll see what happens. But I'm not willing to give up on P. Rich either. So that was the biggest takeaway from what Callahan had to say. You get to Dwayne Haskins. Let me just say this. I was down on Dwayne in terms of his press conferences after the win versus the Detroit Lions. I thought that was a really porous press conference. He's been awesome since. So let me acknowledge that right now. He was really good at the podium after the win versus Carolina. And that it's easy to be jovial and cordial at the podium after a win. What I want to see is when he doesn't perform well or he was okay in a game and they're bombarding him with questions that could be a little uncomfortable. I want to see how he handles that because everything was all peaches and cream last week. You have a dominant performance on the ground. He didn't have to do much. He had some drops. He was really solid in that game. I thought he handled himself well, though, after the game and even today at the press conference. I thought he was great last Wednesday at the press conference, pretty much coming up and saying, look, that's on me about not being there for the final snap. It'll never happen again. And that's all I wanted the first time around. That's all he had to say the first time around. So thought he was good then, thought he was good today, and pretty much what he said. And I love some of the things he said because, they threw some really baitable questions at him where they could have sucked him in and you could have said, no, don't answer it that way. But he was able to sidestep a lot of the little traps that they set for him at the podium. And I love that because I'll give you an example. They asked him, hey, you're playing against Aaron Rodgers at Lambeau. All right, you know the Packers can score points. You know Aaron Rodgers, one of the most prolific quarterbacks. Do you feel the need to have to keep pace? Do you feel like you got to go out there and score a bunch of points? He's like, look, no, hold on. You got to score points in this league to win, period. Doesn't matter who the opponent is. We needed to score points against Christian McCaffrey and the Carolina Panthers last week. I'm not going to put it upon myself to try to go out and do more than I need to and force the issue and make mistakes trying to keep pace with the Green Bay Packers. We just need to go out and execute. We need to score points because we just need to score points, not because of any particular opponent. I love that answer. Every week is a week you should be trying to score points. Not because it's the Packers and it's Aaron Rodgers. You're like, oh, and this isn't even the Aaron Rodgers of old that could put 47 on your head in a blink of an eye. That's not what they're doing anymore. So in case people weren't paying attention, this is a Packers team that wants to run the football and then go play action fake and then drive it down the field. They're more traditional in what they're doing this year under Matt LaFleur. It looks more like along the lines of what Kyle Shanahan's doing in San Francisco, what Sean McVay is doing in Los Angeles with the Rams. It looks more on par with those guys because that's the tree that he's from. So it's not what you're accustomed to from Aaron Rodgers, but I love that answer. He also talked about the connection that he has with Geis and Harmon, and he talked more about his connection with Harmon and how they both grew up in New Jersey and they used to play together back in high school, and they did some things in the off season in the summertime, you know, when they were younger together. And so I didn't realize how deep that connection went, but he kind of expounded upon that at the podium. He talked about a number of things, how, you know, the cold weather that they're going to face at Lambeau and how he's accustomed to that because he played in the Big Ten. And obviously a lot of cold weather games if you're playing in the Midwest. And so he's not opposed to playing in the cold, and he feels like he can handle that. And, you know, he talked about a number of things, not leaving the pocket too soon, keeping his eyes down the field, marrying his eyes with his feet, and all of the things that you want to continue to hear him progress about. He's talking about coverages that he sees and how to look off defenders. And so he's starting to get the intellectual part of the game where he's playing chess now. He's looking at the defense pre-snap. All right, I see what you're trying to do here. All right, so you're taking that away. I know exactly where I need to go. And if that's not open, then I know what progressions to go through. And then he even talked, and this is, again, why I'm so encouraged. He even talked about getting to the check down. He's like, hey, you know, I'm taking some sacks that I probably don't need to take. And some of that stems from, and he said, look, those guys get paid too. And he's right. Sometimes your offensive lineman just gets his ass whooped. Or sometimes they just got a well-timed blitz and they got more guys than you can pick up. Sometimes the defense just wins. But he's like, there are other times where, you know, I can help my offensive line. I can get rid of the football. I can, you know, find the check down a little sooner, go through my progressions a little bit more quicker. So he said, and there's times where I'm looking deep, and instead of coming down and taking the short, the short guaranteed completion, you know, sometimes I'm being a little greedy. And I actually like the fact that he's greedy. You know, I don't want him to stop being aggressive because I don't want to check down Charlie. However, sometimes the defense is telling you, bro, you can't have that 30-yard, you know, that 30-yard cross. You got to take this, you know, 12-yard cross. You know, you got to take this 8-yard cross. You know, you can't have the deep one. The safety's coming over the top of that. You can't have that one. But you can take this underneath one because the backer got sucked up on boot. And so now that guy coming across the formation, across the field, is wide ass open. You got to take that one. And I've seen him turn that one down looking to hit the deep one. So he talked about that as well. So it's a maturation process. And I like what I'm hearing from him. And he's starting to get it upstairs. We know the physical tools are there. All right, that's never been in question. It's always been about the mental makeup. And I also thought that he was a smart kid coming out of Ohio State. So I wasn't really worried about it there. I just wanted to know how quick was he going to be able to pick it up. He's picking it up fast, and this is why I felt like he needed to play. It's one thing to take mental reps. It's another thing to see it and then be able to watch tape and assess and be able to then take what you learned and then execute it out on the field. And we're seeing that from Dwayne Haskins. As I've said, and we talked about this all the way back in the preseason, we saw a steady incline of his play in the preseason. It seemed like he was getting better and better and better every week. I'm feeling the same way about watching him during the course of this season, from Buffalo week, in his first start, to the Jets game, which I thought was a slight step backwards. All right, the one time I thought he regressed, but then I thought he took a good step forward against Detroit. And look, the Detroit game was frustrating from a standpoint of missing, but it wasn't bad mistakes, and he wasn't seeing the field poorly, and he was diagnosing everything correctly. He was just missing. I thought he cleaned up a lot of that against Carolina. So I like the progression. I like where he's heading, and I like what I'm hearing from Dwayne Haskins at the podium. We're going to deep dive into the Green Bay Packers tomorrow, talk about that game, what the Redskins have to do to try and get a win. It's not going to be easy, but it's not impossible. I don't think it's going to happen. I'm going to just give you a spoiler alert again. We beat 3 backup quarterbacks, all right, this season. We have yet to beat a real starter, a true starter in this league. Well, we're going to get that test on the road at Lambeau, a place that we haven't won in since 1986. All right, was the last time we won at Lambeau Field. Let that sink in a little bit. All right, we've been to Lambeau many a times since 86, but we haven't won. Now, we beat the Packers in Milwaukee in 1988, but that wasn't in Lambeau, okay? The field was being renovated then, so they weren't playing in Lambeau then. We haven't won in Lambeau Field since 1986. I wasn't even born yet, okay? I was about to say I was a little pup. No, I wasn't born yet. Wait, I was born yet. I was born. I was a little tyke. I had just been born, all right? Just a little tyke. So it's been a while, okay? Been a little bit. So, and I think it's going to continue to be a while. Grab a Snickers, because it could be a while before we finally do win in Lambeau. But in any event, that's going to do it for your man, Louis T. Before I get out of here, I want to check the comment section. I've been doing a very poor job of making sure that there haven't been any super chats or anything. I hate when you guys super chat me and I don't see it. I feel bad because if you spend the money to super chat, your comment deserves to be read. So I'm going to go ahead and just scan real quick. Okay, don't see any super chats. And I really don't see anything that I need to read. But in any event, I thank you guys for joining me on the show. We'll have a lot to discuss tomorrow. And we'll start to look at we will look at the Green Bay Packers and figure out what the Redskins have to do to get a win in Week 14. And if you want to start getting crazy, that can happen after Week 14 if the Redskins somehow miraculously come out of there with a win. They're not going to do it, okay? Don't forget, this is not a good Redskins team, all right? Just 3 weeks ago, we were talking about how bad this team was and how there wasn't as much talent. That hasn't changed in 3 weeks, okay? Just the level of opponents. That is all, okay? Now we're going to play a team that is 9-3 and looking to win their division at their place where we haven't won in over 30 years. You're going to see the Redskins, I believe, and I could be wrong, you're going to see the Redskins regress back to where they were earlier in the season. But we'll talk more about that tomorrow. I am your man, Louis T, signing off. Remember, if it's not your man T, it's not the best NFL coverage it could be. Make sure you like this video. Subscribe to the Louis T Network if you haven't already done so. Make sure you share this video if at all possible. Check out the Louis T Network podcast. And remember, we're Skins fans and we got skin in the game. Why? Because we're Skins fans for life. This has been the Redskins Nightly News live. I thank you guys for joining me. God bless and good night. Take care.
Louis T Network.